Hello and welcome back to Deep Sleep Creep's YouTube channel. Today we are going to be looking at a compilation of November horror stories from this past month. This is to get you caught up on some stories you may have missed this month. So sit back, get comfortable and let's go deep. I'm a 23-year-old female and I attended a Halloween costume party this past weekend. I had gone with a couple of my friends to a mutual friend's Halloween party. There was a big bonfire, booze, and some of that green stuff going around, so there was a big crowd. To make matters a little creepier, the friend's house is far off the main road. No neighbours for miles, surrounded by sugarcane fields, and the nearest paved road was about 2 miles up from the dirt road that you had to drive down to actually reach the house. Given the natural spooky season vibe, there was a natural chill factor. I was getting food from the food table when a guy walked up and stood across from me. He was wearing a burlap scarecrow-looking mask. I've seen it before at party stores. It's creepy yet very commercial looking. Hey, Halloween is just a night for girls to dress up like skanks. Nice to meet you too. Now get away from the mac and cheese, please, I was thinking. I can't believe you actually left the house like that. I was stunned, and I really didn't know how to respond. To be honest, the only thing I was thinking was, what did I do to you? I'm just trying to get my mac and cheese and buffalo chicken dip, as that was my only focus because it looked good. I ignored this guy because I could immediately tell that he was hoping for some kind of attention. It's a little tight around the top, isn't it? Okay, Scarecrow. I don't know how Dorothy did things in Oz, but I can't control the ladies sitting on the upstairs balcony. And it's a Ghostbuster costume. I know skanky, as you would put it, but it confused me even more why he was being sucker dick, because it wasn't like my costume was that promiscuous. And if he had a problem, he was welcome to leave and enjoy himself. Have fun doing whatever it is that you're doing, I said, as I got my food and walked back towards my friends. Something about the Scarecrow seemed off, aside from his abrasive personality. I tried my best to avoid looking in his direction. But when I did, he was either sitting alone or attempting to talk to some girl that managed to find herself briefly alone. I had lost my friends for a short time, and my good pal, the Scarecrow, came over and had a seat next to me. He just sat cross-legged and let his arms drape over a surface behind him. "Where do you stay at?" he asked. I got up and walked away. I don't know what world he lives in where he thinks I would answer that question. Not one that I live in. I knew probably about 60% of the party people here, but I couldn't place a name to his voice. It didn't sound familiar from the voice alone. Nerd alert, but he kind of sounded like the Bretons from Skyrim. I hope someone knows what that means, otherwise let's ignore that nerdy comment. I told my friend who was the party host we were at, that the Scarecrow was being a little too creepy for my taste. I asked if she knew who he was, but she claimed she hadn't seen anyone in that costume. I pointed him out to her, but she didn't know who he was. It was getting late and I was attempting to leave. I was only one of maybe a dozen people left standing. The rest had either gone home or were dealing with alcohol-related roadblocks in their journey home. There hadn't been any sign of the Scarecrow for about an hour. As I'm about to get in my car, I was jump-scared by who you would have guessed. The 6-foot-tall Scarecrow man who thought it was a great idea to pop out from behind a vehicle. Too bad. I would have ran him over. Sorry for my dry sense of humour, I was just that pissed. What's your problem? I've been trying to talk to you all night and you won't give me any of your time. That's the problem. You slutty women look at people like me like we're not good enough. Geez, this was uncomfortable. I wasn't talking to him because he was being disrespectful. He was mean and a jerk. And it just baffles me how he didn't understand that. This was just another step towards being uncomfortable. I wouldn't give somebody like that my time or attention because he didn't deserve it. You can't just insult people and think I would have a nice time talking to you. I told him that I wasn't interested and that I needed him to leave me alone. He kept rambling on, and I finally asked who he was. His response was simple and unsettling. He chuckled and said, "I wouldn't dare show you what's underneath Carly Beth." That's a line from Goosebumps, to those of you that don't know. I had to look it up because it sounded familiar. Suddenly my friends, Let's call her Taylor's boyfriend ran over towards me and stopped when he was between me and the scarecrow guy, out of breath. "Sorry, Taylor, told me to walk you to your car," he said, looking at me. He looked at the scarecrow and waved him off and told him to fly away, little canary. The scarecrow guy turned away and left. Not sure where he went, but it wasn't near me. I thanked him and was able to leave in peace, but I kept checking my rear-view mirrors for anyone that may have been following me. Because I'm also really cautious, I checked under my car for tracking devices. Maybe a bit of an overreaction, but I've never been kidnapped and wasn't planning on that night being the night. I texted my friend and asked about the guy. She still doesn't know who he was, but she theorizes it was a party crasher who showed up with the intention of scaring people. Regardless, it was creepy, and I hope me and this scarecrow never meet again. I'm a 21-year-old male now, but this story happened around 3 years ago. I was 18 years old around the time this happened, and I worked as a waiter in a restaurant in a local mall. I'm very introverted, but it never affected my interaction with my customers, but speaking to people I wasn't serving gave me major butterflies. I had just finished my shift around 5 p.m. and was walking out, when I noticed a woman who looked in pain holding her stomach and was looking right at me. I had to walk past her to get to the exit, and I was trying to avoid her because I was not looking for conversation, and I hated when people asked for money. I know it is selfish, but I worked really hard for the little money that the customers tipped me that day. I maneuvered my way around the people, but she called out to me, and I acted like I didn't hear her and moved faster. Eventually, she ran to me and grabbed my arm, crying, "Please, please, brother, I have children and I got cancer of the stomach." She lifted up her dirty shirt and showed me a large surgery wound across her stomach. I told her I didn't have anything, but she continued to badger me. Eventually, I just ran to the stairs and went upstairs and saw her chasing, but I was way more faster. She slowed down at the second case to catch her breath, and I turned to get off at the third floor where she could not see me. I took the elevator next to the stairs back to the first floor, so I could get to the exit. Eventually, I got to the bus stop and was on my way home. When I got off at my stop, I went to the corner shop to get some snacks. At the end of the road, I saw the woman from the mall and her boyfriend. They must have definitely seen me, even though I purposely made an effort to take the longer way home so they wouldn't have seen me. Around 7 p.m. I get a knock at my gate. For some context, I live in a house that has 2 slide gates in front of the main entrance. I looked out of the window and to my horror, I saw the woman and her boyfriend. I stayed quiet and hoped they'd just go away, but they stayed outside my house for 2 hours until my parents arrived. They begged my parents for money or food to feed their kids. My father found it weird that they were there at 9 p.m, so he told them we didn't have anything to give and to get away from the house before they called the police. Surprisingly, they left without any hassle. I told my parents that these people were begging me for money at the mall and that they followed me home and stayed outside the house for 2 hours. Concerned, my parents say if they ever saw them again, they called the police, and if I ever saw them at work again, to get more security too. But luckily, we never saw them again after that day. It's still a creepy encounter I had, and I feel very lucky that nothing really bad happened, because for all I knew, the woman could have been faking her pain. My name is Alex, and I was 27 years old at the time this happened. I've always been a rational person and believe everything has an explanation. I'm a software engineer working in a small but reputable tech company. My life revolved around lines of code and algorithms, and I rarely gave a second thought to things beyond the screen. That was until that one night when everything changed. It was a chilly autumn evening, and I'd just finished a long day at work. I was exhausted from a long days of work where my eyes hurt dealing with the compiler that I decided to unwind with a late-night jog through a nearby park. I usually did this because I enjoy jogging, and the quietness of the night gave my mind time to relax. I got my running shoes on as soon as I got home and started jogging through the dimly lit paths. The air felt nice on my skin, and I was already feeling good. But as I ran, I felt an eerie sensation, like something wasn't right. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, but I dismissed it as paranoia. I should have paid more attention to my instincts. With each stride, my unease grew. I finally made it to the park, usually bustling with joggers and dog walkers, now felt deserted. It was odd, I thought to myself. I would usually wave hi to Cammy and her dog Max, but this time they weren't there. I just shrugged it off as life happens. I quickened my pace, hoping I would feel better the faster I jogged. Then, I heard it, a faint rustling in the bushes, followed by eerie laughter that stopped me in my tracks. As I slowed my pace, I tried to catch my breath and rationalize the situation. It's probably just some teenagers messing around, I thought. But the laughter grew louder in the woods, and I had an overwhelming feeling that I needed to leave now. The laughter wasn't your normal kids messing around. The laughter sounded evil. It sounded like it came from a deranged person, is the best way I can describe it. Panic surged through my veins as I realized I was no longer alone. Someone or something was lurking nearby, waiting for the right moment to strike. I couldn't see who or what it was. My heart pounded in my chest and I knew I had to get out of there. I sprinted toward the nearest park exit, but the sinister presence kept pace with me, always just out of sight. The laughter turned into a menacing, guttural whisper that taunted me. My mind raced with fear and confusion. Just as I reached the park's entrance, the thing chasing me showed itself under the park's dimly lit light blocking my exit, and I stumbled backward in sheer terror. It was a figure dressed in worn-out clothes, but its face is what disturbed me the most. Its face was obscured by a grotesque mask, eyes gleaming with malevolence. The mask seemed to fuse with its skin, and it emanated a malevolent aura that paralyzed me. With the mask fused to his skin, I realized what he was pulling out behind his back. It was a machete. He or it laughed even more as he pulled it out and started heading towards me. How could this be real, I thought. I was in fight or flight mode, so I took a deep breath and sprinted past the horrifying figure, forcing myself not to look back. He threw the machete at me, but luckily just missed me. The thing chased me briefly, but then abruptly stopped, retreating back into the woods. My heart pounded and I just kept running, not stopping until I reached the safety of my apartment. During my sprint, I was questioning my own sanity. Who or what was that? Could it be from a long day of work that I was just seeing things? Could it be because Halloween just ended so the freaks are out? No, that didn't make sense. I was trying to rationalize how that scenario made sense. When I got home, I locked all the doors and windows, my hands trembling as I recounted the chilling encounter. I had no explanation for what had just transpired. That night I couldn't sleep, haunted by the memory of the sinister figure and its malevolent laughter. I never returned to that park, and I now avoid dimly lit places after dark. I also never told anyone about this experience until now. If I can't rationalize it, I won't be telling my close friends or family because they are just as rational as me and wouldn't believe me. Heck, I don't even believe what I saw sometimes. Just how my body responded with pure adrenaline as a response to danger made me believe it more. I've done a lot of research and still found nothing to explain my encounter. Hopefully that'll be the first and last time I encounter that thing. I, 17 female, had a creepy encounter just recently involving a haunted house. My parents opened up a haunted house in my dad's shop, and we had a few actors. Names were obviously changed to their role. The actors were me, my dad, my mum, my sister, Bear, Ghostface, cheerleader, alien, prisoner, doll and skeleton. I know it's a lot. Let me explain how the setup was. The shop has a store in the front, a gym in the middle and storage in the back. Dad would lead the customer into the storefront and ring the bell to let us know to get ready. Then the customer would pass Bear and Ghostface. Then they would get jump scared by cheerleader, me and prisoner, and then pass through the rest. The alien would follow them. Simple enough. So when we were near the end of our time, Dad let in a guy. You know, like normal. I don't want to profile him, but he seemed to be of Arabic descent or Muslim because he was wearing his ethnic clothes. He shall be known as a creepy guy. I think now I should mention most of us are minors. Sister, Bear, Ghostface and Skeleton are middle schoolers, and Cheerleader and Alien and I are high schoolers. Creepy guy touched Bear's shoulder and almost pulled a knife on Bear and Ghostface. After he passed them, he didn't notice Cheerleader but grabbed Alien and scratched his arm. After that, he stared at Prisoner and ignored me. He then started speaking in a different language. It sounded like chanting, but I wasn't sure. He was chanting towards Skeleton, Doll and Sister. Mum then finally ran him off. We were on edge for the rest of the night and closed the haunted attraction for obvious reasons. I have 3 theories. Theory 1. He was a druggie, which is a common thing in my small town, unfortunately. Theory 2. He was a really religious man praying over us. I heard in some religions they don't like or agree with Halloween, so it could be something along that line. Theory 3. He was cursing us. I'm leaning towards one, but it was still creepy. My name is Mark, and I'm 25, about to turn 26 when this happened. I was a dedicated journalist and loved searching for the next big story. My career had taken me to the darkest corners of society, but I'd never encountered anything quite as unsettling as the events that unfolded during my investigation into an urban legend. I had been researching the local legend of a haunted, long-abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. My curiosity got the best of me, and one gloomy evening, I decided to visit the mansion for an up-close look. I was excited when my boss gave me the go-ahead to explore it. It was a Friday evening, and he gave me permission to do that and to leave work early. As I approached the decaying structure, an overwhelming sense of fear settled upon me. Just looking at the structure gave me the creeps. The mansion looked beautiful and worn with time, but something didn't feel right. Needless to say, I didn't care and still wanted to explore it. I explored the dilapidated mansion, my camera in hand, snapping photos of the decaying grandeur. The fireplace was boarded but surprisingly still intact, and it was beautiful. The floorboards creaked with each step. I was kind of worried of falling through because some floorboards bent a little as I walked on them. But as I descended into the mansion's dimly lit basement, a strange sensation washed over me. It was as if a shadowy presence was watching my every move. I stopped at the basement stairs because of my overwhelming feeling of being watched, and reluctantly went into the basement. The basement was pitch dark, and I had to rely on my camera's flash to illuminate the surroundings. That's when I heard it. A soft, chilling guttural noise that seemed to come from the far corner of the basement. "Leave," it urged in a sinister, hushed voice. My heart pounded as I spun around, looking for the source of the voice. But there, in the dim light, I saw a man, hunched and disheveled, hidden in the shadows. His eyes were wild, and his face contorted into a grotesque grin. He wore tattered clothes and clutched something sharp in his hand. My instincts screamed that this man was deeply disturbed, and I had to get out of there. Fear surged through me, and I turned to flee. But the man lunged toward me with surprising speed, brandishing the sharp object. I dodged his attack, my heart racing, and made a mad dash up the basement stairs. The man gave chase, his manic laughter echoing through the mansion as he pursued me through the decaying corridors. I burst out of the mansion's front door, gasping for breath, and didn't stop running until I was back in the safety of my car. The disturbed man remained inside the mansion, but the feeling of his malevolence lingered. Once I got in the car, I realized all my equipment was gone. I dropped all my expensive equipment as the man was chasing me. Screw that, I thought. I'm not going back in there. My boss can yell at me later if the police don't find it. I reported the incident to the authorities, and the mansion was subsequently cordoned off. As a journalist, I had sought a gripping story, but that night I had come face to face with a disturbed individual whose presence still haunts my thoughts. The police later found my camera and returned it to me. They said the individual was probably a druggie. As they left, I was thinking, Why would he leave my camera if he was a druggie? Curious, I looked at the footage and a shiver went down my spine when I saw he took a photo of himself smiling with blood coming out of his nose. I gave it to the police, but sadly they said it was really too dark and not much there to do anything with it, but they'll keep it in file. At my job, you're usually prepared for encounters like this. But with all the training I received, I used none of it. My fight or flight kicked in and luckily I made it out alive. For some context, I'm a 29-year-old single female who loves to be outdoors and be a solo hiker. I often hiked by myself because I'm an introvert and need solitude a lot of the times. I've always found solace in the quietness of the wilderness, far away from the hustle and bustle of city life. However, a recent hiking trip would forever change my perspective on the tranquility of the great outdoors. Oddly enough, I heard about this mysterious remote cabin from my Facebook group and wanted to venture out and explore it. The cabin was supposedly abandoned, and people say a lot of mysterious things happened there. People report that not only was it supernatural, but there were stairs leading to nowhere around it, which caused me to be really curious and wanting to explore even more. The forest was thick and had a dim green light over the trail. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional calls of distant birds. My solitude was complete, or so I thought, or so I. As I approached the cabin, I felt a growing sense of unease. The forest seemed to close in around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I had an unsettling sense that I was not alone, that there was someone or something lurking in the shadows. The hair on my arm stood on end. Good, I thought. I was also a little bit of a thrill seeker who constantly wanted to experience my own weird stories to tell to my friends. So this was exciting. I finally reached the cabin, and not surprisingly, it looked like an old abandoned cabin tucked within tall trees. Its windows were shattered, and nature took over it with the overgrowth of brush and grass. Also, the door stood slightly ajar, making me think people have explored this before. I cautiously pushed it open with a knife in hand in case something jumped out at me. Inside, the air was heavy with the musky scent to it. When I first walked in, there was a living room with no furniture. Attached to the living room next to it was what looked like the kitchen. Off of those rooms were what I assumed were the bedrooms. A simple layout floor plan, nothing much to it. My footsteps echoed through the mysterious cabin. Then, from the darkness of a corner, a disheveled figure emerged, their eyes wild and unsteady. Their clothes were ragged, and their face was obscured by a matted mess of hair. In their trembling hand, they held a jagged, rusted blade. I felt a knot of terror constrict my chest as I realized I had stumbled upon a person who had seemingly lost their sanity. My heart raced as I slowly backed away, careful not to make any sudden movements. The deranged figure muttered incoherent words, and their gaze never left me. I had to get out of there before things took a dark turn. I backed out of the cabin, one step at a time, my eyes locked onto the disturbed individual. Once I was outside, I turned and ran. I don't think I ever ran so hard in my life. The man pursued me, his frantic laughter echoing through the woods. I sprinted, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The branches cut me mostly on my legs, but also my arms and face. It hurt like hell, but in that moment it didn't matter. I knew I had to get out of there despite a few cuts and bruises. All I was thinking about was running and running hard. Luckily, I hiked these woods before, so I knew a shortcut. I made a beeline to a known campsite, hoping to find people there. With my luck, I was able to see a couple of families. I go to the campsite and probably looked like a maniac, as one dad blocked himself between me and his kids, and the other dad was about ready to take his gun out of his holster. "Stop, stop, stop," I pleaded. "What the hell?" the man asked, still on edge. I tried catching my breath and explained that a man was chasing me. They walked past me and looked around behind me. Total quiet and silence. No man. Not even a cricket chirping. The families looked at me all concerned, but I kept trying to convince them a crazy man did run after me with a knife. I was on so much adrenaline that I didn't realize my own knife was still in my hand. As I slowly put it away, the tension calmed down. The man was gone, and I knew I had escaped a potentially dangerous situation. I didn't realize it then, but I was bleeding pretty badly from one of my legs that one of the mums gave me a first aid to clean up all the blood where the branches cut my skin before they escorted me back to my car. I drove back and reported the incident. The officers said they will check it out, but there's not much they can do. I later warned the Facebook group of what I encountered. Some believed me and some didn't, which didn't matter. Either way, I'm glad I made it out with my life and I never went back there again. I was a 22-year-old college student who was studying biology when this creepy encounter occurred. For some context, I preferred working full-time on my internship during the day and taking classes at night. My internship paid me good money, so I wanted to work as many hours as possible, so I would have less student debt at the end of graduating. I was never really concerned with safety, since I dormed at one of the safest college campuses in my state. My life was a whirlwind of assignments and exams to the point it was automatic. But one night, I realized that I should also pay attention to my surroundings, especially at night. When you're young, you never think anything bad would happen to you, or that you're indestructible. Well, unfortunately, I'm here to tell you you're not. It all started with another night at a late evening college class around 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. that would lead to a creepy encounter on my way home. The class had ran longer than usual, sadly, and the teacher finally dismissed us with our assignments. I stayed back to chat with some friends, but they had to get in their cars and leave, and I had a little 10-minute walk ahead of me. I always enjoyed walking across campus late at night. It was the perfect winding down from my long day of work, studying and classes. It was calm and peaceful and had a nice breezy night air. Campus was completely empty as I headed my way back to my dorm. The streets were dimly lit and a thick fog hung in the air, creating an eerie atmosphere which I enjoyed. As I was walking, I suddenly had a strange feeling that I never had before on my walks back. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked around and saw nothing but quickened my pace anyway. I suddenly started hearing footsteps, and they weren't typical walking footsteps. They were fast and intentional. As I turned a corner, I noticed a man lingering in the shadows. He was dressed in all black and his face was obscured by a hood, and a mess of hair was breaking through it. His presence sent off all the alarm bells in my body, and when he began to follow me at a distance, I knew I was in trouble. My heart raced as the man's footsteps grew closer. I tried to rationalize the situation, thinking maybe he was just heading in the same direction as me, but my instinct screamed otherwise. I increased my pace and so did he. Panic washed over me and I started to hyperventilate. I turned a corner, my mind racing, and I realized the man was no longer behind me. I breathed a sigh of relief, but as I carefully looked around me, I spotted him standing in the shadows, his hood concealing his features still. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his predatory gaze. The man was no longer following me. He was stalking me. Desperation coursed through me, and I knew I had to escape this freaky situation. I changed my route. I knew of a 24-hour coffee and convenience shop my campus has, so I went there. Veering into a brightly lit convenience store, my heart pounding as I continually looked at the man. He hesitated, but ultimately didn't enter the store. The store clerk noticed my distress and offered to call the police. I nodded and said yes, I was that scared. I stayed in the store until the police arrived, describing the man who had been following me. They conducted a thorough search of the area but found no trace of him. I was shaken but relieved to be safe. After that, any time I needed to walk home at night, I'd have my friends walk with me or have them drive me to my dorm. I was not going to experience that again, and luckily I have not. My name is Danny, and I was 12 years old at the time of writing this. I lived in a small town, and behind my house, there's a thick forest that my friends and I love to explore. One sunny afternoon after school, we decided to venture deeper into the woods, beyond where we'd normally go. We were bored and thought it'd be fun to go deeper. It was myself and my friends Sam and Jake. We did this often since our parents didn't like for us to be inside for too long. This was before iPhones, so you can imagine playing in the forest was our only main source of pure entertainment. Other than video games, but my brother was an idiot and broke our game console that summer, but that's a story for a different time. The forest was dense and we followed a winding trail with our stick at hand, swatting at the tall overgrown grass. We didn't have a clear destination in mind, but we were on an adventure and exploring where we had never been before, so that was exciting enough. After what felt like hours of hiking, we stumbled upon a set of train tracks, the rusty metal stretching into the horizon. Beside it was an old, rickety bridge looming, its wooden planks worn by the passage of time. We decided to follow the tracks for a while, our imagination running wild as we pretended to be on a grand journey. As we continued, the forest grew quieter, and a sense of unease settled in. It was as if the world around us had paused, waiting. The air grew heavy, and our excitement turned into being scared and on edge. As we neared the bridge, we spotted a man sitting on the tracks, his clothes ragged and torn. He had a scruffy beard and matted hair, and he was hunched over something we couldn't quite see. The stench of decay and something foul filled the air. I wanted to turn back, but Sam and Jake were curious and wanted to keep going. I had the worst feeling in my stomach ever. We admittedly weren't the nicest boys. We were sort of those tough bullies in school, which I'm not proud of by any means. But Jake and Sam wanted to see if they could pick on the person. We approached cautiously, our curiosity mixed with fear. As we got closer, our worst fears were confirmed. The man was eating something. A rat, or at least what appeared to be a rat, gnawing on it with a ravenous hunger. Our stomachs churned and we stepped back in horror. The man turned toward us, his eyes wild and unfocused. He muttered incoherent words and reached out as if to grab us. Panic gripped us and we turned and ran, not stopping until we reached the safety of our neighborhood. It was much darker out, but luckily we had Sam, who had a built-in compass, it seemed like. Wherever we went, he knew the way back instantly, like he traveled it before many times. We told our parents about the encounter, and they called the police, who promised to investigate the situation. As it turns out, the man wasn't there. Shocker, we all thought. It was a haunting experience that stayed with us for a while. We were never allowed to explore further in the woods again. We had to be in eyesight at all times from then on, which I can't say I blame my mum. I, 27 male, was up one late night at around 3 a.m. I was relaxing at my home and on PC, watching movies, playing games, etc., when I noticed I was out of cigarettes. The only thing that stays open this late at night is our local gas station, not too far from my home, but still it's easier to go with a car. I took my car keys and locked my house and I went to the gas station. I live in a small European country, which is generally the safest country on the planet. Still, that doesn't mean that some bad things don't happen here and there. When you exit from a suburban area where I live, you need to take a right so you can take the main road. After that, you just go straight for about a kilometre, and then go left for another kilometre to get to the gas station. Halfway through the drive, I noticed some girl walking on the sidewalk. Keep in mind, I usually drive slower at night because at this time a lot of people would speed and go through a red light. Anyway, I noticed she was walking faster than usual. It looked like she was panicking, and I noticed two guys behind her who were like 10 feet away, maybe less, pointing at her and doing some hand gestures towards her. They gave me a really creepy vibe. As I was getting close to the girl, I noticed she had a worried face on, like she was about to cry but didn't cry. So I pulled over close to her and said very quietly, "Are you in trouble?" And she just looked at me and noted with the nod of her head that she was. I told her to get in the car and she did. I told her I'm going to the gas station to get some cigarettes, but I will take her home as soon as I finish buying the cigarettes. She thanked me for what seemed like hundreds of times. I asked if she wanted to report the incident to the police, but she said only to take her home. I went to the gas station and bought me some cigarettes and a bottle of water for her. She was clearly still in fear and I felt really bad for her. Luckily, she didn't live too far away and I dropped her off at her home after that. We passed the same street where those two guys followed her, but those guys were never to be seen again. Imagine if I didn't run out of cigarettes that night. See, everyone, addiction can be a good thing when you have a chance to help someone out in need. Just kidding, but you understand. I know I should quit, but it felt good knowing I helped someone who could have been in a really bad situation had I not intervened. Okay, so just to preface this, my friend and I were 18-year-old females at the time, and this happened on a Friday. My friend and I had smoked weed before going out to eat to catch a movie. So my friend and I are in line at Burger King and trying to decide if we want to split a meal or get separate meals. My friend orders her food, and when I get to order mine, I get asked straight if we smoked weed. My first thought and question was, is it that noticeable? Now I could barely hear this guy because he was speaking low but was asking about a certain strain that I could really care less about. But it gets to the point where he tells me how much I could get for a certain price point, which I said I would keep that in mind. Now my friend and I didn't spray any perfume or body spray, which we normally do, but completely forgot this time, unfortunately. I get to the table my friend picked out and I start telling her about what just happened. Not even a minute after I sit down does this guy come over and pass me a folded up napkin of this weed to sample. Now my friend and I are just shocked and talking about this. I ended up putting the napkin in my bra because it was the only place I could. I had no pockets. This guy ends up coming to our table 3, 4 more times within the span of 15, 20 minutes. When I went up to get my food before these other encounters occurred, this guy had let me know that he got off at 7:30 p.m. and asked if we wanted to hang out. I straight up said that my friend and I were on a date and were going to a movie straight after this. After I got my food, this guy stopped at our table to ask what movies were playing, what his name was, which I don't remember what he said, just that it has something to do with the California's state bird, and the other times I can't remember why he came over. He just spoke to me and not my friend, and I could tell this guy was trying to get some information on me. Now I'm a very private person, and also a very cautious person. I could tell this guy was trying something and I acted dumb, even though I knew what was going on. My friend had noticed that after the last time he came over that this guy was staring at me any time he passed by. I could tell he was staring at me because of the windows that made a reflection because my back was to him. It got a point where I told my friend we need to hurry because this is making me uncomfortable. So we finished quickly and left. Now my friend and I did originally go to the movie theatre, but decided to watch the movie at home because of how busy it was. Luckily, we made it to my home safely without any further encounters. In hindsight, I guess he could have been following us, but we haven't noticed. Nothing else really significant happened the rest of the night, thankfully. I don't think I will be going back to that Burger King anytime soon because my hair colour is blue. It's very noticeable, and not many people have that colour in my town. Plus, it's a smallish town. I hope to never meet this guy again, and if I do, I may have to have a backbone, especially if he acts like he did this time. Not a very scary story, and also trying to tell this days later doesn't help, but that's my creepy encounter. This creepy encounter happened recently as I was driving home from work. For a little context, I'm a 26-year-old male who works as security for a local tech building. I typically leave work at around 3 a.m. So, as I was leaving work, I came across the usual intersection not too far from my house. There was a car from the opposite side of the road, facing me, who was turning into where I'm going, and we almost hit each other. We both stopped on time and it was no big deal, so I thought. But the guy in the car is noticeably yelling at me from inside his car, giving me the middle finger and all. Alright, so I let him go ahead and I thought that would be the end of road rage for tonight, but wow, was I wrong. Immediately after I let the guy through, behind him was a car turning very fast, so I accelerated and quickly got in front of him. Not out of ego or anything, I just thought that considering the position of my car in the turning lane, it's likely that this dumbass would hit me. So I was extremely worried and wanted to prevent a car collision at all costs. I still had to take a class due to a speeding issue, and my license may or may not be suspended because another asshole also decided to hit me. So I was really avoiding to not get hit at any cost. Right afterwards, this guy is obviously mad and starts flickering his extremely bright lights at me for a minute straight. It was getting really annoying really fast, considering something brighter than the damn sun is shining at me for a minute. You can tell it's freaking hard to navigate at night like that. So, against my better judgment and the need to be petty, I decided to annoy this guy further and slow down to around 30 miles an hour from 50 for a minute or so. In hindsight, it probably wasn't the best idea to mess with an unstable person. To my surprise, he was still flicking his lights, but not as much now. At this point, I was close to home and turned into my subdivision, thinking this whole saga would end then and there. But in a shocking twist, this guy follows me into my maze of a neighborhood, and I get near my house and he's still following me. I freaked out and was wondering, should I just park in my driveway and he might go away? Or should I just go into a random neighborhood and lose him there? So as soon as I pass my house, I decide to go right past it and into another neighborhood a couple minutes away, and sure enough, he follows me there. I figured my best course of action now is to try to lose him as I went to my friend's house, whose dad has a nice arsenal of weapons. Once this psycho sees my friend's dad come out of the house with his cigs and beer at hand and gun on his waistband that he always carries, I'm sure this guy will back off. No one in their right minds would mess with my friend's dad. He's a nice guy to those closest around him, but once an idiot talks to him the wrong way, he has no problem fighting him. So at this point, I left that neighborhood and I just stomped on my gas pedal and sped down the road and made a random right turn. At this point, he's still following me, but it's a red light for him, so thankfully he stops. And after that, he lost me. I went around my neighborhood a few times to be sure that I did lose him, and luckily I didn't need to get the help of my friend's dad. So I was able to head home, but not surprisingly, I didn't get much sleep that night. I constantly looked out of my bedroom window facing the road, seeing if this man has passed by my house yet. Luckily, not that I saw. Honestly, this was a scary experience for me, considering my suburb isn't too far from very dangerous hoods where gunshots can be heard often. Who knows if I would have stopped my car at home? Maybe this guy would have got a gun out and shoot me. It's just unsettling that this guy would follow me to my house just to scare me. Although it's not surprising, I guess, because there were a lot of crazy people around our suburbs, and sadly with guns. I, 31 female, bought my first home back in 2016 on my own as a single young woman. I was so proud and excited, especially after finally leaving the toxic guy I was with the previous 5 years on and off. It was the fresh start I needed. Anyways, I moved in. Just me, no roommate, and my ex had never been there before. The house was a small 2-bedroom rancher built in the 60s, but updated a little bit. It had a dirt crawl space for storage and a huge fenced-in yard with 3 gates, which was perfect for me and my dog Max. The 3 gates were a metal gate, a small gate to get to the front door, and an old wooden gate to pull into the covered garage type area. I'm a nursing assistant, so I do a lot of night shifts, and after living in the house for a few weeks, I get home from a night shift at 6 a.m, starting to get light outside, and I notice there is apples all over my front yard. Not apples off a tree though, store-bought apples with the stickers thrown all over my front yard. I was pretty tired, so I just brushed it off as kids messing around and went to sleep. A few weeks later, I got off another night shift and everything seemed normal as most mornings, so I went to bed. I had a house sitter the weekend prior as I went on a girls' trip with some friends, so the house sitter had some people over to have drinks, which was totally fine, but they had left cans in my fire pit. When I woke up after sleeping that day, I went to let my dog outside to pee in the backyard, and all the cans as well as burnt chunks of wood were laid in a perfect circle around the outside of my fire pit. This seemed odd, but I just kind of thought it was some neighborhood kids messing around. Another few weeks goes by and I again get off the night shift. I pull in my driveway and my heart sinks to see all my gates wide open. They were all closed and latched when I left. Something just felt off this time, but I was tired after a long shift and told myself not to get freaked out over stupid kids being annoying and went to sleep. That following weekend I had off and my cousin wanted to go to the movies, so I agreed and she picked me up. When I left, I put my dog in the house, locked the door and left the porch light on since it would be dark when I got back home. When I got back, I came home to find my dog outside, the door left unlocked and the porch light turned off. The switch for the light is inside, and this time I was freaked out. I called my dad to come check the house for me. I was convinced someone had done this from the inside and that someone lives in my crawl space. But he came and checked and found nothing. I ended up getting a roommate to ease my mind a little and feel a little safer. So a guy from work was looking for a place to live, so I offered him a room and he accepted. He was a big dude, so I felt if it was someone messing with me, they would think twice with him living there, and boy was I sadly wrong. One night I was home alone as my roommate was working night shift. I fell asleep on the couch watching a movie, and I woke up to a missed call from a random number. I googled the number since I had never seen it before, and it was a number from one of those apps you could download to call or text anonymously from. So I tried calling it back, no answer. Then seconds later I get a text saying, "How's the movie?" I ask who this is and they say, "Who do you think this is?" I ask my roommate if he's messing with me and he replies from his normal number, "No, why?" I started panicking and goosebumps appeared all over my body. So I tell the random number to cut it out, that this isn't funny, but they continue to say things to me as if they can see me. I'm super creeped out and ran to my window and closed the blinds. They then begin to ask me to come outside to see who it is, and I run to my door and locked it. Then they say, "It's Corey." I didn't know a Corey. I ignored the texts and they eventually stopped, and I waited until my roommate got home so I could sleep. Nothing ever happened again after that, and I still live in this house with my now husband. To this day, I still don't know who or what that was. I am genuinely curious what everyone else thinks this is. Was I overreacting? Could this have been my toxic ex-boyfriend? It still haunts me to this day, never being able to find out who that was or what its motives were. This may not be an excessively creepy experience, but it is an unsettling experience nonetheless. It all happened in 2015 around this time of year. Back then I would walk a bike path daily to this bridge that led out to a bigger pond and back. It was roughly 5 miles and it ventured through several parks, but was overall in a pretty urban area. It was around 3 to 4 p.m. in the afternoon on this day. The sun was shining and the cooler air made the walk much more enjoyable than the summer heat where I would constantly get bitten by mosquitoes. The bike path gently descends beneath multiple road overpasses, and there's a slightly spooky and uncertain feeling when you find yourself right in the midst of these dips, as they create a sort of miniature tunnel formed by the overhanging structure. Anyway, I was walking down the dip, and I heard a bike coming down the hill fast behind me. I stepped over further to the right but didn't really look back, and was startled at the fact that the cyclist practically grazed me as it passed, instead of giving me a good distance between us, because there was plenty of room where he or she didn't need to graze me. I was kind of flustered and annoyed, it all happened so fast. Then the woman stopped a little bit ahead of me and started to look back at me, and I thought, oh shoot, confrontation. But when she looked in my direction, I realized the cyclist was actually just a really large child that I'd mistaken for an adult. It was still kind of dark where she stopped, so I couldn't fully see her expression, but she stayed still with her head facing me for several seconds. I could tell by her silhouette that she was indeed staring back at me. She was just frozen and silent, propped up on the bike with her foot out, and it creeped me out to say the least. I wondered if maybe she was non-verbal and just expressing frustration about our near collision in the only way she knew how. Or was she socially awkward or a mentally crazy person? I just didn't know, so I said nothing, unsure of what to do next. Anyway, I stopped walking towards her because it felt a little creepy, and I just gently said something in acknowledgement. I don't think I said hi or anything, I don't really remember. Anyway, she suddenly turned and pedaled off in the same direction I was headed. She wasn't with an adult or anyone that I could see. I looked around and I didn't see any more bikers coming down the long trailing path. or heard any more bikers after her at all. I kind of stopped thinking about it as I walked, as she just seemed like an annoyed kiddo. I was able to enjoy the rest of my walk and take in the beautiful landscapes. I stopped a couple of times and took pictures of the beautiful changing colour of leaves overlooking the pond area that I was able to walk to. But as I hiked back off the trail, I noticed something under my car. The trail meets up with public parking, which happens to be at a public school lot. It briefly borders the parking lot, so I could see something under my car as I approached. I realised it was a bike, and to this day I'm still 95% sure it was the girl's bike. It was under the back of my car, like someone tried to lay it down flat and shove it under there. I still feel extremely disturbed remembering it, because I can't for the life of me think of an explanation behind any of this. At the time I was worried someone in the lot was watching me as I noticed the bike and removed it, but I didn't see anyone or have any problems as I left. I just leaned the bike against a tree and left. I didn't pay close attention to too many details about the bike when I saw the girl, because it was such a brief encounter. But I remember thinking it looked boring because it was white on grey, or something very plain and not typically girly. I guess I could be wrong about it being her bike, and it could have been a coincidence, but it was just so strange, and I wanted to share this story. If anyone can tie this together, or if I'm just overthinking it, please let me know. Okay, so for some prior context, I live on a horse farm or barn property. There's 3 sections to the property: the main barn, the courtyard, and the living quarters. The main barn is exactly what it sounds like, but there is a door that goes upward and into a large apartment where most of my family lives. My family consists of my parents and little sister, who's a toddler, myself and my older brother, who are both teenagers and almost young adults. We live separately, in the living quarters, which is in the front of the barn. Between the living quarters and barn is the courtyard, a circular, flat and open empty stone brick area. The living quarters are shaped kind of like an L, with 3 rooms and 1 massive room. The 3 rooms are bedrooms, with the furthest being my grandfather's, who was not here when this story takes place, mine, and then my older brother's. The massive room is the living room. The upstairs area has a stairwell leading up to it, with a door on each side. Okay, so to the actual story itself. It was around midnight, but I couldn't tell you exactly when. I think around 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. is the range. It was raining badly. I was in the barn upstairs, hanging out with my parents, talking about something stupid like politics, completely unimportant to the story. A break comes in the conversation though, and as I lean forward to stand up, we all hear at once the sound of someone punching the door to the stairwell in the barn leading upstairs. They punched 8 times. My older brother's the only person supposed to be on the property, and he not only knows not to knock loudly since our little sister's sleeping, but that door wasn't locked. There was no reason to knock. I was the closest to the door and I'm a pretty anxious person, but I always underestimate it near family. For some reason, the way the knocking continued put me off so much that I immediately broke into some weird anxiety attack, and my family, seeing that, all acted with me despite not being too worried yet. I locked the door, told my dad to call 911. My mum called my sister and I grabbed a knife while my dad grabbed his pistol. The upstairs area has 2 what you can call balconies that overlook the inside of the barn, and my dad stepped out there, looking over the inside to make sure nothing was going on. I kept my head to the door and kept hearing something going on. It sounded like somebody was walking up and down the stairs, trying to be quiet, but being really bad at it. It got to the point where I felt like I was playing chess with somebody trying to hurt my family. I wouldn't let my mum stand directly in front of the door, because somebody wanting to get to us would probably just shoot right through the door, hitting her directly. The police said they were on their way and it would be 20 minutes. Anyway, calling to my older brother, we obviously asked if it was him and he just said, "So that wasn't you?" Turns out, at the exact same moment, somebody slammed on the window facing him. He was just frozen, and it took him multiple seconds to turn. By then, nobody was there. My mum started looking over our cameras and there were no visual alerts, despite there being a camera perpendicular to my older brother's window. It would be physically impossible to not be seen, unless the camera didn't catch it from the insane amount of rain pouring down. We waited and waited, what seemed like forever, remaining frozen to our position. 20 minutes passed, and the cops still weren't here. Confused, obviously, my dad called the operator and asked why the cops still haven't arrived. All they could say was, "There's similar reports in your area. They're going to the previous report first." Most of the family was decently safe with at least a gun, but for 20 to 30 straight minutes, my brother was forced to stand in a room in complete silence, unarmed, with 3 different unlocked doors and an uncovered window that someone had been staring at him through just a few moments ago, while knowing the police weren't coming. Eventually, though, through all of the different and more minor things going on, the police got here and checked over everything. Nobody. Nothing. Not a single sign of anybody having been there. And here's one of the worst parts. Only one camera caught something, and it was only because one of our barn cats, a white one that stood against the black background, accidentally activated it and made it start recording. And what it caught was both of the knocks, both on my brother's window and the downstairs door. 8 seconds apart. And the absolute worst part, which is the thing that keeps me from sleeping the most, is that in the months it's been since the incident, it takes a whole 30 seconds of full sprint on dry ground to get from the window to the door. Not to mention it was pouring rain and that you would be caught by 4 separate cameras. If somebody could please explain, I'd be super appreciative. Despite not believing in ghosts, I'm open to literally anything at this point. So this happened about 11 years ago when I was about 16. Those days after school let out, my grandparents would drop me off at the local youth centre. It was a very small old building on a rundown street. Right next to the youth centre there was a bar. I had been told time and time again to never play around outside. Since the area was rough, anything could happen. Now, for a little extra context, the youth centre receptionist, guide, sat at a desk and watched over everyone. Also, they had a camera system mounted on a wall inside to ensure visitors in the front area were safe. One day, there were 4 of us at the centre. We were all doing our own thing, working on homework, reading, playing games. Kyle, a friend I had made at the centre, stopped by. Now Kyle was a grade above me, nice enough too, but he was a little bossy. Anyway, he grew bored sitting with us and said he wanted some air, pressuring, "Come on, are you seriously scared?" At this time it was getting dark out. I could see the sky going black from the front window. For some reason we still followed him outside. I remember trailing him across the street to a big dirt lot full of debris. We all huddled together, laughing and dancing and just goofing off. That is, until we saw a strange man waddling down the empty street towards us. He was about 30, had tousled neck-length brown hair, was skinny, pale, dressed in a dirty hoodie and jeans. He was smiling a lot, like creepy, insane-level smile. "Hey, he rasped. "You kids having fun?" Kyle was unfazed, cheerfully answered with a duh. The rest of us were quiet, put off by the man's arrival. "Want to come hang with me?" This moment stays with me because I remember getting a bad feeling in my stomach, like I knew he could hurt us. And then, the man tucked a hand into his hoodie, slow, deliberate. Kyle and I started making a bunch of noise and we all booked it back across the street. I heard the man's hyena shriek laughter as we ran into the centre. I'm forever grateful we got out of that situation safely. After that scare, I continued to visit the centre and never mentioned this incident to family, but I was much more careful, staying indoors. Always trust your gut. This story happened just last November. I'm only now getting around to writing it down. I would consider myself an outdoors man. I grew up in the sticks. I've spent a lot of my life wandering in and enjoying the backcountry. I'm older now and have settled down in the suburbs. Wife, 2 boys, a house, a dog, a desk job, the whole suburban 9 yards. I want opportunities for my kids that come from suburban life, but I also want them to grow up with an appreciation for the outdoors. So when my oldest son was big enough for his first solo father-son camping trip, I was excited. My wife and younger son stayed home for this mid-fall trip. It was going to be a great bonding experience for me and my son. Because my son is just 5, I didn't want to do anything too extreme on our first big solo camping trip. We needed a place that wasn't too deep into the Colorado Front Range, but still allowed for dispersed camping. I don't consider camping in RV parks or established campgrounds to be actual camping. You might as well be at a motel watching TV. Camping at most is a tent, sleeping bag and a fire. A dispersed camping area called Gordon Gulch, west of Boulder, caught my attention. I'd never been to this area before. There were no facilities and it was dispersed enough you couldn't see or hear other campers nearby. My son and I had a blast that day. We set up camp, collected firewood, went for a hike, saw a moose and a bobcat, tried a little fishing, and finally, as the sunlight faded, we returned to our campsite to light a fire. We had a traditional and nutritious camping meal of fire-burned hot dogs and marshmallows. It was a good day. Definitely a core memory for both my son and me. The perfect first camping experience for a preschooler. Or so I thought. I was catapulted out of the void of sleep. Not sure what aroused me, I sat up collecting myself. The world seemed to be at peace. It was quiet. Just me and the breeze through the treetops. I couldn't figure out what woke me so suddenly. The sound of my son laughing in his sleep cut through my groggy confusion. It was a deep belly laugh. Must be a fun dream, I thought hazily. Gently rocking him was enough to quiet him down. That must have been what startled me, I determined. As I repositioned to fall back to sleep, my son burst out laughing. I sighed and closed my eyes. He'll quiet down soon enough, I thought. He laughed again. This time his laugh was echoed by something outside our tent. I held my breath and listened, unsure of what I just heard. It wasn't an echo. There was something out there and it was laughing in unison with my son. My grogginess vanished as the adrenaline began to pump. It couldn't be real. It had to be my imagination. I sat up in my sleeping bag listening to the night. Hearing nothing after a minute, my muscles relaxed. I started to settle back down. Must have been hearing things. I was tired after all. Checking the time, I saw it was 4 in the morning. The sun would be up in a couple hours. My son laughed again, and again it was answered with laughter outside. I was now absolutely certain it was not an echo. As I tried to make sense of what was happening, the voice outside called out my son's name. My blood ran cold. That voice, it was so familiar. Then it clicked in my brain. It was the voice of my younger son. That wasn't at all possible. He was safe at home with my wife, miles and miles away. I could hear twigs crunching beyond our thin nylon tent walls. It was impossible to tell the distance from us. But there was something out there, circling us. Unprompted this time, it called out my son's name in that little toddler voice. My 5-year-old, still fast asleep, called out to his brother asking him to play. The thing outside the tent laughed in reply and urged my son to come outside. That thing with my little son's voice sounded cold, hollow, dead. The floodgates of my adrenaline burst open. Cold sweat formed on my face. I was frightened out of my mind, but my primal caveman brain roared to life. I was in Papa Bear mode. Nothing was going to take or hurt my son. I was putting a stop to this. Whatever it was out there, I didn't care. You don't mess with my kids. Say what you will, but when you're camping miles from anything, it's not worth the risk of being unarmed. Wild animals, wild people, you have to be prepared. I almost always take a firearm with me when I'm camping. Pepper spray and bear bells are great, but nothing gets attention from a conscious threat faster than the sound of chambering around. I spoke loudly into the night that I had a gun and was coming out. I hoped the fear in my voice was masked by my aggressiveness. The only reply was the breeze through the treetops. My son was still asleep. Kid's a hard sleeper. Another trait from his mom. My wife and I have joked that he could sleep through a tornado. Stepping out into the cool November night, a gun in one hand and a flashlight in the other, I surveyed the campsite. The fire was down to embers. Our fishing gear was leaning against the pickup. The firewood was still neatly stacked. Nothing seemed out of place. The voice called out, this time from behind, and this time focused towards me. "Daddy, Daddy!" It was my youngest son's voice again, crying out for me from the dark forest. I threw the light beam in that direction. A pair of shimmering green eyes were illuminated by my flashlight. They were only 2 or so feet above the ground, the same height as a toddler. I took a small step toward it. I wanted to see more. I needed to see more. The eyes, unblinking, remained in place. Getting closer didn't help reveal this thing. It seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight, almost devouring it. I couldn't make out its size or shape or color. It seemed to swallow up all the light around it, save for its 2 shimmering green eyes. That thing laughed in its hollow toddler's voice, this time with malice and cruelty in it. The eyes never looked away from me, never blinking, focused only on me, like a predator before the pounce. Not wanting to give up any ground to a predator, I stepped forward again. It didn't move. Not knowing what to do, I screamed as loud as I could. I waved my arms, trying futilely to shoo it away. The eyes shimmered, and as I stared back, the eyes shifted from green to amber. I watched as they began to rise up into the air. It was now apparent to me this thing had been crouching and was now standing up. I could only watch in silent terror as the eyes finally stopped rising, nearly 10 feet off the ground. The night air erupted with a deep growl. I could feel the vibrations in my guts. I couldn't see a mouth, but I could hear teeth snapping and gnashing. My son in the tent behind me began to scream. That was the only time the eyes lost focus on me and shifted towards the screams of my kid. My only reaction was to fire my gun into the air. The eyes immediately vanished. My ears were ringing, but I could hear the growls turn to shrieks, followed by a cacophony of crashing branches and undergrowth. I stood there until I couldn't hear the shrieking anymore. It trailed off deep into the trees. I was left with only the sound of the breeze in the treetops and the quiet sobbing of my child. Twilight was beginning to illuminate the forest. Shaking and exhausted, I sat down in the dirt in front of the tent. I tried to collect myself. "Daddy, Daddy, where are you?" my 5-year-old shouted. That got me out of my daze. I picked myself up and went into the tent to retrieve him. Putting him in the truck, I locked the doors and wasted little time breaking down camp. We were out of that camp and back on the road by the time the sun broke over the horizon. I have no idea what is in those woods. I do plan to camp in that area again, albeit without my family, and definitely with some friends. I want to find out more about this thing. Thankfully, my son doesn't seem fazed by anything that happened that night. He thinks I was chasing a bear away from the camp. And maybe he's right. I hope he is anyway. My son can't wait to go on another camping trip. But truthfully, I'm thinking the next family camping trip might be at an RV park, or even a motel. That's family camping, right? I woke up around 2 a.m. a week ago, groggy and disoriented, to prepare for my usual night shift. I noticed that my cat, Oscar, who typically sleeps at the foot of my bed, had left in the middle of the night. This wasn't unusual, but the door to my room was closed with no other way out. Puzzled, I quickly searched the room, but after being unable to find him, I figured my older sister had whisked the poor cat away to her room. No big deal, I thought. I finished preparing and was ready to head out. But just as I reached for the doorknob, I heard a soft hiss coming from my room. I marched back in, now convinced Oscar was just hiding somewhere out of sight. Peering under the bed, I discovered Oscar, huddled at the far end of the bed behind an assortment of shoeboxes. His fur stood on end. I'd never seen him behave like this before. After calling out to him for a few minutes, trying to gently coax him out to no avail, I worried that something was terribly wrong with Oscar. I made an awkward attempt to crawl under the bed and try pulling him out. While I was not particularly fond of cats, Oscar had always been a quiet and gentle companion to me since my childhood. He had never scratched me, or anyone else for that matter. Yet for the first time, as I reached out to him, he let out a deep guttural hiss and slashed my arm, leaving a deep gash. Shocked, I retreated from under the bed. I was bleeding a lot more than I would have expected. With a mix of frustration from the sudden violence and panic at the sight of blood all over my arm and clothes, I realized I probably wasn't going to make it to work on time. I quickly texted my boss, letting them know I would be late, before tending my wound, cleaning myself up, and getting changed. Oscar was still hiding under the bed, and just as I was about to try coaxing him out again, I heard a knock on the front door. What the hell? Who knocks on people's doors at 2 a.m? I muttered to myself, perplexed and slightly unnerved. I stepped into the hallway, moving cautiously towards the door. Through the frosted window I could see a somewhat familiar figure standing there, eerily motionless. My heart pounded as I slowly approached. That's when I heard a voice. "Hey, it's me, let me in." The voice in the dead of night sent shivers down my spine. But the most chilling part was the familiarity of the voice itself. It was my voice. The figure on the other side of the door was unmistakably me. "Hey, it's me, let me in," it repeated firmly, now knocking more insistently. Fear set in as I realized that any of my family members would have fallen for this. I was supposed to have left for work by now. Trembling, I began to back away from the door. The figure inched closer, attempting to peer through the frosted window. As it did, I could begin to discern the blurry details on my face. Our eyes locked, and for a brief moment it seemed surprised. But then it smiled. The most sinister, unnerving smile. A smile that I would never make. In that bone-chilling moment, it silently backed away from the door and vanished into the night. Needless to say, I never made it to work that night, or any night since. My family thinks I'm crazy for locking myself away in my room, telling me it was just some sort of prank. But since that day, every sleepless night I've had listening to my cat hiss from under the bed convinces me otherwise. This creepy encounter happened one night when my girlfriend's sister and I went down to the river beach near my college. My girlfriend and I do this frequently, and yesterday my younger sister came up to visit for the night, so we decided to take her down to the little beach on the side of the river that runs through campus to have a fire and hang out. When walking out to the beach, there's about a 20 to 35 minute walk through the woods. When walking down to the beach, we stayed on the trail and had no issues at all. We hung out on the beach for about an hour and a half before we decided we wanted to head back and watch a movie in my girlfriend's dorm. When walking back, we happened to lose the trail as everything was covered in leaves. An important aspect of this story is that there is a clearing where power lines run almost halfway between the beach and the street at the beginning of the trail. This clearing consists of tall grass and pricker bushes that make it difficult to cross if not on the one trail through it. A little while before this clearing, we lost the trail. We had the idea to walk straight in the direction of the clearing, and once we found it, we would walk alongside it until we found the cut-through trail. Now it was dark, so we all had our phone flashlights on, and my little sister was even playing music on her phone. We were calm and didn't think much of it. We found the clearing and started walking along the side of it, trying to find the trail. My girlfriend was a few feet behind my sister, and when I heard the music my sister was playing, I heard a branch snap coming from deeper in the woods. I told my sister to turn off her music and began scanning the area. I thought I heard the noise come from with my light. At first I didn't see anything, and when my girlfriend asked me what it was, I said nothing and continued trying to find the trail. I was still slightly uneasy, so I continued scanning the direction I heard the noise come from with my light. I noticed something white, with what appeared to be ears, standing very still in the direction I heard the noise come from. I couldn't tell if it was some type of animal or just something that looked like an animal. I didn't say anything for a second because I assumed my eyes were playing tricks on me as I couldn't see any eyes reflecting my light. This thing was about 15 to 20 feet away, so I assumed if it was an animal, I would see its eyes reflecting my light. It was also standing very still, so I believed my eyes were playing tricks on me. I moved my light for a second to continue looking for the trail, and when I shined it back in the direction of that thing, I saw it violently swaying back and forth. I said, "What the F is that?" and turned around when my sister looked and screamed, "Why is it moving like that?" I've never heard my sister sound so scared, so I yelled to my girlfriend and sister to run. We ran straight through the tall grass and pricker bushes until we came out the other side. My sister fell and lost both of her shoes. I helped her up and told her to forget the shoes, and we all continued running in the direction we believed the trail to be. Thankfully, we eventually found the trail again and didn't stop running until we got out of the woods. When we got back on the street, we all calmed down and began talking about what we saw. I saw it first and knew something was off when I saw it swaying back and forth. It was very unnatural, and I can only describe it as it looked limp, sort of like a slinky. It didn't look like something a human could do. My girlfriend and sister saw it after I turned to look for the way out. They both said it began charging at us, and it was still swaying like that while coming at us. This was unbeknownst to me at the time. I never saw it charge at us, so learning this information made it even scarier. Even weirder, we all never saw its face and couldn't fully make out its shape. My girlfriend and sister both did say it was running on two legs and was upright like a person, but was moving in a way that didn't seem possible for someone to move. The whole thing doesn't make any sense, and we've been trying to explain it ever since it happened, but no scenario we can think of makes any sense. To make it even scarier, my girlfriend mentioned how when we first got to the beach, she heard someone walking in the woods behind her as my sister and I were busy getting the fire started. This could be totally unrelated, but the thought of this person or thing watching us the whole time we were there really freaked us out. If anyone has any idea what this might have been, please feel free to share your insight, as we are all completely stumped. This happened many years ago in November. My son was approaching his 10th birthday and always wanted to go hunting with me. In the state of Colorado, you needed to be at least 12 years old to get your youth hunting regulation license. My son, however, begged me for years that he wanted to shoot for his 10th birthday, and I finally said yes. He was going to get his youth hunting regulation license soon, and I thought it would be good to practice with him that year. I decided between many guns, but the one I settled on was the rifle semi-auto carbine like the Ruger 10-20 Myself and my wife wanted our kids to be more outdoors people and seek adventure more, since their generation is constantly on their phones and video games, that we didn't want that type of lifestyle for our kids as well. My wife hesitantly agreed when I convinced her to get him a rifle for his November birthday. Since legally speaking he would need to be at least 12 years old to hunt with me, we decided we were going to have to be really careful of other hunters out in the woods. Which is why for the Thanksgiving month, I decided to take him out turkey hunting and camping. Seems like a small and fun activity at the time. I, however, wanted to go to a different forest this time, away from the typical big game hunters and far away from people or civilization in general, so that my son had the freedom to shoot. And I didn't need to worry about anything such as him accidentally shooting people, which I knew he wouldn't because he's a careful boy, but you never know. This also includes away from well-known campsites. We were going into a forest I've never been in before, but I heard it was quiet. Nobody went there, and there were a good amount of turkeys, deer and other wildlife. I wish I saw the red flags of why no one would go there earlier, but I'm lucky we made it out alive. When my son opened up his birthday present, he was gleefully excited to receive a rifle that he jumped up and down and screamed happily. He wanted to go hunting then and now, and I told him we have to wait for cake first, then we can go hunting early in the morning. But I allowed him to shoot a couple rounds in our backyard as practice, teaching him the basics of safety before our long hike the next morning. Once we got done singing happy birthday and eating cake, we discussed our plans for the next day and started packing. The next morning at the dawn of dusk, we got in my truck and went to the woods and started our long hike in the unknown woods. With our guns and our hiking backpacks, around a couple of miles into our hike is when we saw turkeys and started slowly following them. Once we were at a good shooting distance, I taught my son to stay low to the ground and slowly stalk and aim for the turkeys. One shot and he missed. It's okay, better luck next time. My son looked disappointed as most of the turkeys ran off. Then we started following and waiting for some more turkeys to show up. As we sat in silence, focusing on our scope, my son shot again. This time he did get a turkey. "Nice shot," I said. "Thanks, Dad," he responded. We grabbed the turkey and tied it up and attached it to ourselves. Then once again we got to our waiting positions. My son shot something. I turned around to look at what he shot at. Oh geez, it was a person. My heart started pounding and I felt sick to my stomach until I realized luckily my son was a bad aim and missed the person since it was still standing from a far distance. "What the hell, John?" I asked. My son stared at the thing and went pale. "What?" I asked, frustrated and concerned all at the same time. He broke out of his trance and said, "Dad, I swear it was hunched over in the fields and has antlers, so I thought it was an elk or bulk or deer. But then it just stood up. What kind of animal does that?" I have bad far distance eyesight, so I relied on my scope, attached to my gun a lot because it was specially made for my eyesight. I looked through my scope this time and sure enough my son was right. It was standing and had antlers on its head. It looked at us with complete death and evil glare. It had what I can best describe as a hollowed out deer face. No eyeballs either, just two black holes in its place. I froze in my tracks. I didn't know what to say or do. I had an intense feeling like we didn't belong there, like we were intruding on its turf. I decided we should end our hunting trip here. We grabbed our dead turkeys and started hiking to a nearby pond we noticed on our hike up here. We slowly moved and started walking away, staring at it and it staring at us. It wasn't making any movements. It was just watching us as we moved away. I knew with the amount of camping equipment we had left to carry, and my son's little legs, we weren't going to be able to trek far. Luckily, I did have a handgun, big knife and a flare gun in case maybe this thing is afraid of light. In all my years of hunting, I've seen every animal you can think of. Or so I thought. I wasn't quite sure anymore. We eventually got to the pond area and set up camp there. We haven't seen it in a while since we left it back there in the woods. My son kept asking questions that I had no idea how to respond to, like the award-winning question of what the F is that. We put the turkeys in our cooler and started cooking over the fire what my wife prepared. A packet of mixed vegetables, potatoes and seasoned meat in case my son didn't catch anything. My son kept questioning me on what that was. I still did not have an answer. That night we were going to sleep in separate tents, but my son agreed it would be better if we stuck together for the night and leave the next morning. After dinner we set up our big tent and watched as the sun set, creating a peaceful atmosphere. I remembered it being extremely foggy that day, especially as the sun was setting over the horizon. Bummer, I thought. It would have been nice to see the stars with my son. Next time, I thought. I started resting in the chairs outside of the tent with my son and told him all the crazy stories my buddies and I did while we were hunting. I told him all the fun camping and hunting stories I had in front of our little fire pit while we roasted marshmallows for our s'mores. One such fun story was being chased by a bull with my buddies. Apparently they don't like being shot at too much, and we were laughing and practically forgot about the creepy experience and finally enjoyed our mini trip. That was until around 11 p.m. the night was silent. We were enjoying the fire pit and watching it go out as my son drifted off to sleep until he noticed it too. It was quiet. Too quiet. To the point all the bugs, the crickets, the hooting of an owl, all of the sudden stopped. I immediately had a bad feeling because this usually happens when there's a predator nearby when nature goes dead silent like that. I took my handgun out of the holster and my flare gun close by me when I told my son to get in the tent now and to bring his gun. He did immediately without any questions, which I'm very proud of. That he didn't break the first rule of hunting, which was to do what I say without question when we were in a potentially dangerous situation. Him safe and secure in the tent, I took out my flashlight and started scanning the woods. I started scanning the woods for about a minute or two all around me and saw nothing. I kind of breathed a sigh of relief until I heard it. I heard my wife's voice calling out to my son John. It was her voice, but very distorted, almost like a bad recording. No emotion behind it, just my son's name in my wife's voice. A big chill went down my spine, along with goosebumps and hair standing up on the back of my neck. I glared my flashlight to the direction where the voice was coming from, and there it was. That creature again. It looked so evil and menacing. My son, in response, started slowly opening the tent. "Stop!" I yelled at him. "That's not your mum. You stay in there right now." Once again he did as he was told and stayed in the tent, silent. I knew he was scared, and so was I. I was in a standoff with a creature I had never seen before. "I have a gun!" I yelled at it, but it started coming closer and closer. "Stop right there!" I pointed my gun at it, and it seemed like it was mocking me because it then repeated my own voice and said, "Stop right there!" Again in that distorted, emotionless voice. I didn't know what to do. I was stunned. What kind of creature did that? How did it mimic my voice too? I stayed frozen and pointed my gun at it for an hour, and it stayed still in that same position for an hour too. We were having a standoff. All I could think about was that I was going to protect my son at all costs. I was not going to let this thing get to him. Some creatures were afraid of light, the others sound. So I did something that was probably dumb and took my flare gun out and shot it in the air. Bright light came out and exposed the shadows of the darkness and brought it to the light. The thing did not like that very much as it scurried away and hid in the shadows. I yelled, "The next one will go right in your head." After a moment of silence, the nature noises returned. The creature was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief and comforted my son, crying. We were both so scared. I didn't cry because I wanted to be brave for him. I wanted to be his rock, even though I felt extremely helpless still against this creature. The flare gun may have stopped it now, but will it return later tonight? I mean, it's only midnight. I decided to stay outside with my gun and watch the woods in case that thing comes back, all while my son went to sleep. I don't know how he could, but he did. Still awake with adrenaline, I was able to stay up all night long in case that thing returned. Once the sun finally rose above the horizon, I woke up my son and we packed and left the woods for good. We finally got to my truck and drove off. I told my wife about it, and at first she didn't believe me, but when she saw how scared I was recounting my experience, and my son confirming what I said, she believed us, and told us never to return back there again. I was going to suggest the same thing. The important thing was, we were both alive. The next day I told my good hunter friend my experience at a local diner. I grabbed coffee with him to talk about it. I told him what I saw, what happened, its strange voice and how it was able to mimic my wife's voice and mine. My friend Jimmy went quiet and was listening to my story, but also seemed like he had his own memory that he was remembering while staring out the window. I asked him, "What is this creature?" He turned and said, "People say it might be a skinwalker." Yes, I had this same experience with my daughter. She wanted to try hunting and we also experienced this. I started to get red in the face with my voice slightly elevated and asked, "You didn't think to warn me before I brought my son with me?" I started to get up and leave until he calmly but sternly said, "Would you have believed me?" Jacket at hand, I froze on my heels, thinking honestly to myself, No, I wouldn't have, and sat back down. Then he explained to me everything. How that was the skinwalker's land, and a lot of hunters don't want to admit it, but that's why none of them ever hunt there. It was a long, shocking conversation, but that's what happened. I understand if no one believes me. I don't even believe in myself sometimes. Who knows? Maybe my friend and I are both crazy. I do know for sure I will never be returning to those types of woods again. I've always loved my job as a landscaper or lawn care specialist. I make my own hours, get to work outdoors, and best of all, I get to embrace my passion. I view lawn care as much more of an art form like architecture, because no two trees, lawns, hedges or ponds are the same. When you're a landscaper, you basically take the nature equivalent of raw material and craft it into something unique. That's why I view it more like an art form than just cutting the grass, and there is no telling what you may encounter while working. I thought I knew that until my last job. By far the busiest times of year in this line of work are spring and fall. Spring, because after winter the grass and plants are finally starting to bloom and need tons of attention, especially because of the frequent rain. And fall, because it's the final bit of time to keep an eye on things before the months-long cold of winter makes my job irrelevant. I'm usually pretty busy in the summer depending on the weather, because I either have to work hard to make sure grass on lawns doesn't dry out in the heat, or there is no shortage of lawns to mow if it's a rainy summer. But fall also means that in addition to the usual landscaping tasks, there are leaves to rake, which was just fine with me. I've always loved raking leaves, as I find it calming, and the vivid colours on the trees give you plenty to look at while you're working. Most of my clients are long-time customers, so much so that we can communicate very easily as I know what they expect of me by now. But of all my customers, my favourite land to work belongs to Mr. and Mrs. Anderson. They have a large stone house with double doors and blue shutters, and the property is set on 7 acres with a solid blend of all kinds of trees. Lots of pine trees and plenty of beautiful maple and other trees that shed their leaves come fall. And I was due there for a job on a lovely October evening. It was a short drive there, and on the way, I passed numerous storefronts with orange lights or cobwebs in the windows before I arrived at the Anderson neighbourhood. It's filled with people who are actually pretty cool and friendly. That's one reason the neighbourhood is one of the most prized places to go trick-or-treating around here. All the houses are spaced pretty close together. There's plenty of sidewalk and the homeowners get really into the holiday spirit. All down the street were houses decorated in their own unique ways. One was covered with cobwebs and a giant spider, while others were filled with a cemetery, an open coffin, and a collection of monsters. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson kept it simple with plenty of orange lights, pumpkins, and some dried corn stalks arranged around the garage. Once I parked in the driveway, I got out of my truck, got everything ready, and got started on my job. First, I mowed the front lawn. There is nothing like the smell of freshly cut grass on a refreshing fall morning, and when that was done, it was time for me to take care of the leaves. It was early October, and the trees in the backyard were only beginning to shed their leaves, so raking them all out from under the trees where the mower couldn't get them only took about half an hour, and all of them could fit into a small pile. The Andersons always like me to mulch their leaves, which works for me. So I got the mower ready and methodically went about turning the leaves in the backyard into tiny piles that wouldn't cover the grass. When I was done, the smell of leaves coated the air. Also on the schedule today was for me to plant some mums, which was always a big request for me once fall arrived. When that was all said and done, I went home and had a grilled cheese sandwich and some soup for lunch. Several days later, I had an appointment with the Jackson family, who lived next door to the Andersons, so I went right on schedule and took care of their lawn. They generally had fewer trees in their backyard than the Andersons' house, but they were bigger, and their leaves were generally falling at a faster rate. There was a bit of fog that morning that hung thickly in the air, and when I arrived, I could see the grass and the leaves scattered on it were soaked with dew. The Jacksons liked me to use a leaf blower and bag up their leaves, so that task quickly took up to 2 hours. As I worked, I could see the one tree that was technically on the Anderson property, but would occasionally drop leaves on the Jackson property. Thankfully, it wasn't a big deal. The two families got along great and had been friendly for decades. I've met far too many families where a leaf falling on their property from a tree that wasn't theirs was a huge problem. Farther down in the yard, Mr. Jackson was reading a book by his fire ring, which had a fire lit in it and was crackling along in the gentle breeze. The smell from it casually billowed my way and made the fall air with the crisp breeze and earthy smell of leaves that much more invigorating. Definitely a pleasant atmosphere to finish my work in. The next day was one of those rainy October days where you can feel that fall has arrived. It was grey and rainy all day, and everywhere I drove you could see evidence that the steady rain had caused numerous trees everywhere to shed leaves that had thus far managed to stay on the branches. Although I spent the day indoors watching scary movie marathons, I was mentally gearing up for the inevitable post-rainstorm calls that would arrive as soon as things dried up. Sure enough, the very next day the calls came in to repair one thing or another, and out I went to tidy things up. No matter how old I get, it never ceases to amaze me the difference just a few days can make for how fall can look and feel. The colour creeping into the trees was much more noticeable, with a particularly vivid red making itself known on a tree in the Andersons' yard that I could spot when I drove past it. Later that week, there was a nasty storm with intense rain and wind that caused numerous trees to fall, which meant I was constantly being called out to help get rid of tree limbs that had been snapped off in the wind, or help cut up trees that had broken in half or been uprooted. One of the many trees damaged from wind was one of the massive ones in the Jacksons' yard. Once I arrived, I took out the necessary equipment and carefully went to work on the fallen tree limb. It was a massive branch, but steadily the fallen limb became a pile of firewood as I worked under the bright blue sky. I worked until the sun started to dip behind the orange and red foliage. As I finished up, the sun was slowly descending and the mellow autumn light was peeking out from the gaps in the trees, a sight I never got tired of. I had just finished up with one section and was heading to the other side of the yard to get the last bit of tree that had fallen. The final bit of fallen tree was right in the middle of the yard where the surface was flat. As I stepped on it, I could tell how soft and wet the ground still was. But as I took another step, I felt something snap, and before I knew what was happening, I was falling through the earth. Moments later, pain shot through my body as I landed on rocky ground. I waited for a moment before getting up. Fortunately, I always keep a tool belt filled with tools on me whenever I work, so I quickly removed a flashlight and switched it on. Thankfully, it worked. I checked my phone, which was fine, but there was no service down here. But I was able to shine my flashlight up and see the hole I had fallen through. Thanks to the rain, the soil had thinned out and revealed that right under that section of the Jacksons' yard was the entrance to a tunnel that someone had placed a board over. No doubt all the years of rain and other types of weather had worn it down, so that by the time of the recent heavy rain it had been ready to crack when I stepped right on it. Oh well, nothing I could do about it now. The Jacksons were out for the evening, which meant I had no reason to stick around and try to get their attention, especially since there was no way for me to climb out the way I'd fallen in. So that meant I had to follow the small tunnel I found myself in to wherever it led. It was big enough for me to stand in, and in reasonably good condition. No signs of a cave-in. I could feel how the chill had soaked into the earth as I kept walking. There was no telling where I was going or what I would find. All I could do to get out was keep going forward. Several minutes later, the tunnel opened into a cavern, and I realized I was in an abandoned mine. The tools and cart left behind were the giveaway. It wasn't exactly a surprise. I've lived in Pennsylvania my whole life, and there are old mines everywhere. And I've been in several of them before, so I wasn't exactly shocked or afraid as I followed it along. After the work on the Jacksons' yard and the amount of walking I'd done to get this far, I could feel how my body was soaked with sweat under my jacket. But the air here wasn't as chilly as it was above ground, so that helped cool me down at least somewhat. Eventually the tunnel I was walking in narrowed a bit, and the intense darkness of the mine began to fade. Then the tunnel got lighter and lighter, until I was facing a small ladder built into the cavern wall that went up, and beyond that, there was light coming from somewhere above. I switched off my flashlight and carefully climbed the old wooden steps, silently hoping they wouldn't give way. They held just fine, and when I pulled myself up the last step, I found myself facing a small opening in the rock wall that I could just barely fit through. That was where the light had been coming from. I took a deep breath and carefully stepped through it. As I did, I could smell the fresh air and relief flooded through my body, but that was immediately followed by confusion. On the other side of the opening in the rock wall was a wide stretch of open space that was surrounded by trees. From the outside, the rock wall looked like a small remnant of a quarry built into the earth. But the open space wasn't exactly open because it was filled with RVs, but they were not all of a similar type, like you would expect in a standard storage space. Far from it, as it seemed like every possible model or design was here. Giant RVs and tiny ones, Ones that looked older than I was. Ones that looked brand new. Ones that you could see at any campground. And ones you never saw aside from in old vintage family home movies. I slowly started walking through the rows of vehicles. They seemed to go on forever, and it wasn't long before I had the sensation that I was lost in some kind of endless abyss. It was nighttime by now, and my small flashlight was the only source of light. I was walking on cement, which meant that there were no footprints I could follow. But the upside was that I didn't have to worry about leaving them either. As I kept walking on the cement, I remembered that there used to be a factory somewhere around here, and it was demolished years ago. I guess the floor was all that was left. Seeing all the RVs sitting there, silent and abandoned, was downright creepy, especially because this wasn't some brightly lit warehouse. This was outside in the dark, and the faint light from my flashlight dancing over the various vehicles gathered here made it all the more unnerving. There was something seriously not right about all this. For starters, it wasn't like this was an actual storage space for a business that sold them. I'd heard of graveyards for ships, to say nothing of junkyards, but not RVs. And it wasn't like all these RVs were situated in a public space where anyone could come and look. No, these were hidden away in a place people didn't come looking, and I had no doubt it was for a good reason. For a fleeting moment, I thought that maybe this was part of some haunted attraction for the Halloween season. But I know all the haunted houses around, and there was nothing like this.
Plus, there were no Halloween decorations around, and these giant luxury RVs were not the type to be used in a haunted house. So, the only idea left was that something was up here, and it wasn't good. Especially because, as I took a closer look at all the RVs assembled here, it was clear that for all their differences, they had something in common. They had all sustained some kind of small damage. One vintage RV had a broken front window, while I saw a smashed-in side door on one of the giant expensive RVs, and the list went on and on. The sight of a windshield on a relatively new one that had been completely destroyed sent a particular chill up my spine. If all these RVs had sustained damage, then the logical thing that should have happened was for them to be repaired and returned. None of the damage I could see made them uninhabitable. As someone who maintains people's property as his job, none of this seemed right.
I slowly walked on, trying to get my bearings. The space seemed endless, and I carefully wandered along looking at everything until I passed an average modern RV that I've seen plenty of my friends use on vacation. As I passed the door, I shined my flashlight, and the beam of light highlighted that something was on the door's window. I paused for a closer look and saw that it looked like a handprint, and it was made by what looked just like blood. The sight made my stomach sick with fear. Now there was no doubt I needed to get out of here, and fast. Almost if on cue, I heard a sound from far off in the distance, and from all the time spent in nature, I could tell it was a car driving on gravel. Ignoring the fear gripping my stomach, I looked at my surroundings. Some of these RVs, superficial dents aside, were beyond well built. So well built that someone stuck inside would not be able to get out easily if the door was blocked. And I had plenty of small landscaping tools still on my belt that I could easily jam a door handle if I was able to trick whoever was out there inside the RV. So I took a deep breath, switched off my flashlight and put together a plan. I had several minutes, but not much more. Whoever was out there would most likely go up and down the rows of RVs looking for anything out of place. Naturally, an open door would signal that something was wrong and should be checked. Once the person driving was well inside the RV, I could slam the door shut and jam it so there would be no getting out. It was as good a plan as any, and I had to act fast. Thankfully, it wasn't hard to decide on an RV. One of the giant expensive luxury vehicles was the way to go. But even in the dim light, the vehicle's interior was beyond impressive when I briefly checked it. No doubt no expense had been spared from the interior's comfort to the basic strength of the vehicle, which included windows, all of which were in perfect condition, without a single scratch on them. The RV also had the perfect main door, with a metal handle similar to a refrigerator's. If I were to put my small trowel from my belt inside the handle's space when the door was closed, it would jam the door perfectly, and it was the only door in and out of the vehicle. No normal doors to the front or passenger seat. I also was beyond thankful that this RV like several on display, were built with plenty of space for me to crawl under and wait. So once I had carefully opened the door to lure in whoever was out here with me, I removed the small trowel from my belt and crawled under the middle of the RV as quietly as possible and waited. All those years crawling around bushes and hedges would definitely come in handy now as I ducked under the bumper and stared up at the RV. I had barely gotten in place when I heard the tyres on gravel stop. Then all was quiet while I was alone with my thoughts. The silence in the space was so thick it was unpleasant, and I felt like my heart was thudding painfully loud as I tried to listen. After what felt like an hour, I heard it. The sound of quiet footsteps coming my way. I swallowed thickly as I listened and got ready to act as soon as it was time. The footsteps quietly shuffled around before they arrived at the RV I was hidden under. As the footsteps got closer, I could tell whoever they belonged to was carrying a flashlight as well, as the beam slowly bobbed along to remind me someone was getting closer until the beam was right beside me. I couldn't see who the footsteps belonged to or make out any details aside from some basic black leather boots. But as they moved one step closer, I could faintly see the figure's outline in the reflection from one of the RV's tyre rims, and I could see they were wearing a belt with a large knife on it. My throat clenched as I stared at them from no more than a few feet away. The stranger was painfully close as I laid there, and silently willed whoever was out there to just take the few steps inside the RV. And moments later, the adrenaline in my body kicked up a notch as the boots walked the few steps forward into the open RV. I could feel the RV moving slightly under the weight of its new occupant as the stranger climbed aboard, stepped inside, and slowly began to look around. Despite the fear churning in my stomach, I did feel better that the stranger didn't immediately summon a friend of his who had driven here with him when he saw the open RV door. That meant this was the only other person here. So once the figure slowly started walking towards the bathroom and master bedroom in the back of the RV, that was time for me to climb out and spring into action. With my heart pounding harder than ever before in my life, I crept out from under the RV, took the trowel in hand, and gently grabbed the door handle while listening carefully. Whoever was in there had no idea I was out there, as I could feel the weight of footsteps in the back bedroom. So I carefully closed the door, which closed with a quiet click before I immediately jammed the trowel in the handle and made sure it was stuck. It was. The stranger inside had no idea what happened, but it didn't take whoever was inside long to realize something had happened, because moments later footsteps were hastily walking towards the door before there was weight pushing on it from the other side. It didn't give an inch, and some faint relief flooded through my body. I crept quietly away, as whoever was trapped inside tried to apply more pressure to the door, and nothing changed. As I put more distance between the RV and myself, I thought I could hear a muffled yell from inside, but that was it. I didn't stop walking away from the RVs, and before long, I had reached the other side of the open space and found myself facing a wall of trees. There was still no sign that whoever was stuck in the RV had managed to make any progress at all. With that hopeful thought, I took several more steps and finally reached the part of the woods that was well on the other side from where I had climbed out of the abandoned mine. When I finally walked through the trees and was lost in them moments later, I finally felt somewhat better, but I kept my flashlight off to avoid being detected, and I carefully crept along, listening carefully for any sound of movement or voices. As I continued walking in the trees, I heard a second vehicle roaring up from the other side of the area. I immediately ducked behind a tree and turned to watch. Someone had driven into the area via a truck, and the driver wasted no time getting out and racing into the vast collection of RVs, their shoes echoing loudly on the hard floor. I had a pretty good idea what would happen next, and I was right. Because although I couldn't see anything yet, I could hear the RV door being yanked open before it was slammed shut. Then, when both people walked quickly back towards the truck, which still had its headlights on, I could see, and I got a good look at the person who unknowingly walked right past me. He was a tall guy, muscular, and if I had to guess, I'd say mid-30s. His partner fit the same description. What happened? one of them asked the other. I don't know. I went inside to see what made the door open, and before I knew it, it was sealed shut and I couldn't get out. Just like I told you. Well, it was sealed shut with this. I could faintly see him holding up my trowel that was available at any store for a few bucks. And there's no telling who's responsible for it and where they are. We'll just have to take it from here. Right. Then I watched as they both got in the truck and roared out of there in the opposite direction from me. I let out a big sigh of relief before I kept walking. I knew I would eventually reach a road, but every step was tinged with nerves, as I half expected someone lurking behind a tree to reach out and attack me. But after about 2 hours, I managed to reach a road without incident, and when I saw it, I finally had reception to call for help. I immediately told the police what I'd seen, and they dispatched someone to find me while the dispatcher stayed on the line with me. And I'd never been more relieved in my life than when I saw the flashing lights of the police car coming towards me. I described the general direction I'd come from, but it didn't take long for the cops to find the place, because after I left, someone had set fire to all the RVs, and before long, everything there was burning intensely, and the smoke was visible for miles. They had to bring in a massive team of firefighters to calm the blaze down, and they were able to get the fire under control in time for the cops to find out that all the RVs that hadn't been totally burned were all listed as missing along with their owners. The cases involved spanned many years and every region of the country. After some time, the cops were able to use some of what was found at the RV collection to aid in solving some missing persons cases, but there was never any lead on who was responsible for it, nor did they ever figure out what the specific motivation was. As for me, I'll always be extra careful where I step while on a landscaping job from now on. The Jacksons felt horrible when they heard what happened and gave me a huge bonus for my work that day. They were even gracious enough to invite me over for when they gave out Halloween candy. Since they stuck to sitting out on the front porch with some hot apple cider, I happily accepted. Still, I would like to know, what are your thoughts on it? Why would there be a bunch of random RVs, most of which were connected to missing people? Has anyone experienced or known of this phenomenon before? Please let me know.